Hi everyone, Shane here. Just wanted to do an informational video on the inner family. I've mentioned it quite a few times. Uh, some of you who are Almin students have spoken about it in your posts in the group here. So I mentioned quite a few times that I would do a video on this just to give you an explanation as to what our inner family is. Now, the inner family, or also known as the subpersonalities, is based on the work of the great seer and mystic Almin, where I really came across it. I was working with my dear friends and colleagues, Anita and Kira, who've done, Anita in particular has done courses on this that I've taken. And what I'm hoping to do today is to not really get too complex with it. In fact, quite the opposite, trying to keep it nice and simple so everyone can understand it. Working with the inner family is something I do with my clients and have been doing this year in particular. And I found that people have made great strides when they're able to connect with their inner family. Everything seems to slot into place a little bit easier. A lot of the issues that my clients were having were all coming back to dysfunction in the inner family. So let's start at the beginning. As I said, I will keep it simple as best as I can anyway. So the inner family, there are actually 8 members, but we're only going to speak about 4. The 4 inner family members correspond to the 4 levels or layers of the psyche and the 4 brainwave states of beta, alpha, theta, and delta. And anyone who's been around me for the last few years would have heard me talk about these different brainwave states and what we can achieve or what we do in these different brainwave states. So beta would be our kind of, up and about and doing things, which is where I'm at right now. Alpha is that sort of daydreamy state, meditative state. And theta would be the dream state. Also, if you can see my shamanic drum there, when we're doing journey work, theta would be the state that the 47 beats per second on the drum will take your brain into that level. So you're in a deeper meditative state, but still awake when you're using a drum. Obviously, when you're sleeping, it's that sort of in between the deep sleep, which is delta, and that sort of daydreamy state is alpha. That theta is where you're more likely to remember your dreams. So what is these levels of the psyche and brainwave states got to do with an inner family? What's all that about? So the inner family, also known as the subpersonalities, consists of the inner child at the core, the inner sage, which is like the grandfather figure, the inner nurturer, which is like the mothering figure, and the inner warrior, which is that father figure. Now, when I ask my clients to tune in on their inner child, for example, the inner child is a 5-year-old. And it's not them as a 5-year-old, it's like an archetypal 5-year-old. What I've noticed is that pretty much everyone I've spoken to, any clients that I have, all have this fragmentation between the different family members, so between the different levels of the psyche. What happens when they're all split off from each other, when they're, I'm going to say supposed to be together, but certainly work, the original form would be to be in wholeness, that they're like a unified field and like a family that works much better when they're all together than when they're off separate. While they've been separated in this perceived separation that we've all been feeling, this sort of big program that's in place of feeling separate from the source of life, that we've somehow just been left here and we're just trying to get on with things. A lot of this journey is about remembering our wholeness, remembering that we are an expression of the source of all life. And part of the way of connecting with that is to connect with your inner family members. So let's take them one at a time. So the inner child, everyone's, I'm assuming, has at one stage, if you don't have children, has seen children and how they play, particularly when they're on their own. If you look at a 5-year-old boy, for example, who's playing with Lego or whatever it is, he's totally enthralled. nothing else exists. He's fully present in the moment. He's using his imagination. Anything is possible. And this is the gift of the inner child, to be also would see magic all around him, talking about seeing fairies. And while they're in that brainwave state, I mean, that's why a lot of children have these imaginary friends. They can see the hidden realms. They can see all these things that we've forgotten that we can see. Anyway, the point is that the inner child is really fully present in the moment. And that's where the magic lies. That's where we keep getting pulled out of, as adults. You know, our mind takes us off somewhere else. How often are we fully present and grounded in the moment? Well, accessing the inner child will help you do that. It will help you anchor yourself into physicality, to be fully aware of your surroundings, and I guess that's what they would call mindfulness, to be fully aware of what you're doing, but also be able to access the magic of the moment. That's the strength of the inner child. Has such a connection to the source of all life that it's like magic flows through it, the inner child, because he lives in this sort of limitlessness, this idea that anything is possible. And by having this belief that anything is possible, it's like he dissolves, or she dissolves, all these boundaries that we put in place, these mental blocks, these ceilings of limits, that the inner child dissolves them through its enthusiasm and just optimism for an adventure in life of let's go and explore, and everything is so new, and it's like oh my God, look at that flower, or oh my God, look at that tree. They're so amazed by life, and we've lost that love and that spark for the seemingly mundane that the child really loves and really gets into, and ignites this passion for the simple things in life. But it's being in that place that actually opens the doors to so many possibilities of allowing magic to come into our lives, allowing the possibilities of anything happening to come into our life. And that is the strength of the inner child. So I'm going to speak about them one by one, and then how they interact then as well. So the next we have then is the inner sage. And by the way, this, I've spoken before in a video about this. It was an interview I did with Kira, and I'll maybe post that as well for further reference. But the indigenous cultures have a similar setup to what we're describing here in terms of the inner child being at the center. So, for example, North American Indians, the children are at the center. Then there's the grandparents, and then the nurturers, the women of the tribe, and then the men as the protectors on the outside. So, moving on to the inner sage, that grandfather figure. The inner sage's job, one of they all have roles, if you like, within the structure of the family. The inner sage's role is to really speak the language of the inner child, to be able to communicate what the inner child needs, and be able to communicate that to the nurturer and the warrior, to the parents, and say, well, look, the child wants to express something here. It has this wonderful gift, and it really wants to express it out. If the warrior is there, he might say, oh, maybe just not appropriate at the minute. The sage will look at it and see beneath the appearances, using his discernment, and say, yeah, no, that's a good call. We're in a board meeting now, probably isn't the time to start, taking out the crayons and drawing some pictures. So we have to look at the discernment of the sage to not dictate to the child, but to work with the child and say, well, look, maybe not now, but later on we will do that. The real strengths of the inner sage, however, that's his role in the family, to communicate. But the real strengths of the inner sage are his ability to see beneath appearances, to have the discernment to see what's really going on, because he sees the perfection in life. He's has this eagle vision. And you'd say a sage has, like a Dumbledore type of guy, or a Gandalf, has this wisdom. That's fine if the sage is also living in the moment with the inner child. The problems we have with the inner sage, or when the inner sage is what we would say in dysfunction, is when the inner sage is living in yes, it is truth. he would say, well, look, I have many lifetimes of experience. I know exactly what I'm talking about. I know the way things go. And I'm telling you, this is the way things are. So he's basing everything on what he's known as static knowledge over a long period of time, or even on yesterday's knowledge of saying, well, no, this is the way things are. The problem with that is that he becomes very rigid and preachy and actually loses power because he's not up to date with what's exactly going on in the moment, because everything changes in every second, in every moment. Every action you take and every thought you have changes everything. And we all do that. The entire cosmos changes in every moment. So how can the inner sage be up to date with his wisdom if he's living in yesterday's truth? So this is where the inner child comes in, because each of the adults in the family have their own inner child. So there's the actual inner child, the 5-year-old part of the family, and then each of the sage, nurture, and warrior also have their own inner child. When the sage's inner child is alive and permeating his being, he lets go of yesterday's truth because he has this respect. And what I've noticed is that from speaking to clients, there is this lack of respect from the sage and the child, like a disconnect, like a coldness of, you're only a child, I'm the elder here, I know best. And it's being more humble and allowing the child to express through him that this staticness and this stuckness in yesterday's truth dissolves, and he's more open to receiving what's alive in the moment. Okay, so it's like the whole world could have changed in that 24 hours since yesterday. Allowing the child in there allows him to be up to date with that. It also allows him, it's like the child becomes then, through access to unlimited resources from the infinite, through living in such innocence, that this innocence permeates the inner sage, and it's like fanning the wind beneath his wings to allow him to fly higher with his eagle vision, to see more and have more power and have more knowledge available to them in the given moment, that everything is up to date. The inner nurturer, the mothering quality of your psyche, so many of us, particularly people in the healing business, have a dysfunctional inner nurturer. We know we have this almost an inherent wanting to care for others around us. You know, we just have that in us. The difference between a functional inner nurturer and a dysfunctional inner nurturer is the following. So when the nurturer is in dysfunction, it's seeing her environment as external from her and everything in it as needing to be fixed. Not everything, but, you know, looking at certain elements and saying, well, that's not right there. I'm going to have to go and work with that person. I see a person sitting on the street, that person's homeless. I need to solve the homeless crisis in my town. I need to go and feed all the homeless. I need to go and get a placard and go up to the capital city and march against all these things and march for women's rights and march for, you know, saving the whales and whatever it is that this inner nurture is wanting to fix, because she's not seeing the perfection in life. She's not seeing the underlying perfection, with the help of the inner sage as well, of course, and the inner child, seeing the innocence in life and seeing the whole perfection and realizing that it's all this is her environment is an expression of her. When she sees it as something external, then she's leaving the family to go out and try and fix and try and save. And particularly those of us who are very empathic and very sensitive to energies around us, we feel all the pain that's going on in the world. And it's very upsetting to us. And we say, well, I need to do something about this. I need to go and fix, and we get a feeling of comfort knowing that we've helped a person. Now, I'm not saying we don't help people. I'm saying that it's when we're doing it from a state of self-abandonment, when we leave our own home and our own inner child, to go and help everyone else, we're depleting ourselves. And that person we're trying to fix or save we could be actually depriving them of a valuable life lesson that they maybe have to go through, that maybe they have to fall so that they can learn something, that maybe they missed some steps along the way of doing it gracefully. And this is just the tougher route of learning the same insight or the same lesson. And by us fixing the problem, we've deprived them of a valuable lesson, because we're just seeing something that from our small point of view is imperfect. If we had even a larger picture than that, we may say, okay, well, if I know in the back of my mind that everything is imperfection, well, then this doesn't feel like something I need to be involved in. That person will just need to fall, and I know that, they'll get back up again. Just like when you're a child, you don't, we as toddlers, we learn how to walk. How many times do we have to fall? Hundreds and hundreds of times. We fall on our bum, we fall on our knees, we fall on our face, and of course the parents, we'll try and catch, but more often than not, we're going to fall. But we get back up again. We dust ourselves off and go, no, we're going to get this. There aren't too many 18, 19-year-olds, being held up by the arms by their parents around the supermarket, still because they wanted to save them from falling. Not at all. It's just some things that we go through in life, that we'll fall and we'll stumble, and that's just the way it is. But when the nurturer is leaving the home, the child is there and feeling abandoned and feeling vulnerable, which further brings up more signs in your environment that your child needs nurturing. And you will see more and more and more and more things needing to be fixed in your external environment, and you go after more and more, and you will abandon yourself more and more, and you will deplete your energies more and more by going after trying to fix these things. Whereas if we'd actually just looked in and been at home for ourselves and tended to our inner child, we'd realize that, okay, our environment is starting to look a little bit different now, because I'm at home. There's a completely different view from here than from out there. So you rather than going out and try and fix and save, we tend to the source of why all this is showing up in our environment in the first place. It's that our inner child is feeling abandoned. When our inner functioner is at home for herself, and she's holding this this feeling that, okay, all of that I see here in front of me in my environment is an expression of me. There's more of a sense of always being at home, no matter where she is. When she's tending to her own needs first, I always use the analogy of being on the airplane, where you're told you put your oxygen mask on first, and then you put on the child's oxygen mask. Because if you're trying to put the child's on first, and then you lose consciousness and the child can't put it on for itself, and you don't have it on right, then you're both goners. You tend to yourself first. Now you're in a position of strength to help everyone around you. It's when we leave, we're in a position of weakness because we're depleted. I often call it the Irish mammy syndrome, but I think it's not just mammies, and it's certainly not just women. It's particularly people who care and want to help. We can go too far and we end up being depleted. I mean, how many people do you know, and particularly looking at mammies, that are just exhausted from having given everything to their children, all their lives, given everything to their children. They're told, you get fed last. You've got to spend all your money on making sure your children have everything that they want. Give. And there's nothing left for you. And you wonder why cancer creeps in, which is in spiritual terms an illness of not being at home for oneself. Fungus, same thing, not being at home for oneself, which makes sense. It's like a stagnancy, that develops. If there's no one in a house, it's like squatters coming in that will just take over. Or it's like mold starts to develop in a place that's not kept, that's not warm. So that's the dysfunctional inner nurture. In judgment, the functional inner nurture is fully giving to herself, knowing everything in her environment to be her. And if it comes to a stage where something lands in your lap of you get this sense from an overpouring out into your environment of resources and support and nurturing and love. And it's love without cords or without a needy heart or without attachments. That is the strength of the nurturer. Then something crops up on your plate and say, yeah, this feels right. This is what I need to do. I need to help this homeless person, or I need to have this other old lady cross the street, or do the shopping, or call in on a neighbor, or whatever it is. But you're not scouring the streets looking for homeless people, or you're not scouring the streets looking for little old ladies that need to cross the road or need their shopping done for them. It's happening through resonance, through just everything in divine timing, landing in your lap in a certain way, and you're just in the space of just being aware that, yes, this is what I need to do. Okay, I hope that makes sense, the difference between the two. Look, going out almost ambulance chasing versus just allowing the world to unfold and destructure whatever way it needs to, but you see the perfection in all of this, and you're just involved in what's inspiring for you to be involved in. Okay, so the inner warrior, the inner warrior is at the outside of this ring, or this setup of the family. So you have the child, the grandfather, the mother, and then the warrior, the father figure, is at the outside, and his job is to be the sentry at the gates, the bouncer, to say, to protect the sanctity of the inner family, to protect the space. To stand firm at the gates, almost to be like a lion standing at the gate. So it's more of a setting of boundaries, as opposed to being aggressive or feeling that there's anything to fight. Because the warrior in dysfunction, again, has abandoned the family, because the warrior is living in mirrors. He doesn't have the innocence of the inner child to dissolve the mirrors of opposites. The inner child in full expression, and the whole family actually in full expression, will dissolve the mirrors, because a mirror in your environment is showing you something that you're not, or something that you have yet to express or discover about yourself. So when the nurturer isn't there to hold the environment as an expression of the entire family, the warrior feels that he's out there on his own and having to engage and blame, and particularly when he's feeling like the nurturer that things need to be fixed or something isn't right, he's out there saying, oh, well, it's that guy's fault that this happened. He's in victim mode and he's blaming people, and his back is up, and he's out trying to put out all these fires and deal with all this hassle, feeling that he's completely alone, and feeling that he's in a war zone, feeling that he's having to take on the responsibility of the rest of the family. But the problem with that is that he's left his post. So it's open season for anything or anybody to attack the inner family. Now, if the inner child, for example, wants to express something really creative, and the sage isn't there to discern, well, maybe this isn't the right timing, or it wants to communicate to the warrior to say, the child wants to express, what do we do here? There's no warrior. So the child goes ahead and does take the crayons out at the board meeting, or does say something really innocent, but it's completely out of context. There's no discernment about it. It's said to the wrong person at the wrong time in the wrong place, and there's a backlash. And I've seen so many people saying, I can't understand. I was just pointing something out in innocence. There was no harm in it, and it was taken completely the wrong way by this person, and now they won't talk to me anymore, and I don't understand why that is. This lack of discernment and the warrior not actually standing firm and saying, well, no, this isn't the right time to do this, has caused this, and there to protect the child from any backlash that would come in from lack of discernment of the inner sage, creates a whole lot of problems. Then the child goes further into himself and doesn't want to express anymore. The nurturer is not there, so he's no one to go for some sort of encouragement or just an arm to nurture and to hold him. And the child retreats further and further in, and we wonder why we have lost our sense of magic. And we wonder why we just don't have our boundaries. We wonder why there's so much wrong with the world. We wonder why we keep seeing things in a certain way and can't understand how they're playing out in a particular way, because we've no discernment. We can't see beneath the appearances of things. So that's the introduction to the each of the inner family members. But they also need to, like I said, the inner nurturer and the inner warrior, the inner sage, all have their own inner child as well. And what I've noticed is when the warrior does come home, it's a sense of, it's almost like for all of them actually being somewhere that they kind of remember being there before, but feel very alien as to what their roles are. They've forgotten what they're there to do. So it's, when I'm working with my clients, it's not just a case of identifying with them again, with the inner family, that is. It's actually explaining their roles and seeing how they interact with each other as well. So the warrior very often will be detached from his inner child. His inner child may be actually lost. Maybe he doesn't, like the sage, doesn't really respect the inner child. Is going, yeah, well, you're just a kid. You haven't seen what I've seen, and I've been out in battle, and you know, this sort of crack about just being innocent, I don't know, it'll get you killed out there. But the warrior is basing all these opinions on, and these beliefs that he has on being out on his own, because he didn't have any discernment. He didn't have the qualities of the other family members to help guide him. So all he had to base his actions on, and he's the strategist, he's the one that protects our thoughts and our feelings from parts of our environment that are we're seeing as malevolent. His job is to protect. His job is also to strategize, to say, okay, where are we going to go next? He's the one that takes all this action. You know, we can have all this inspiration coming up, but we need someone to take action on it. So he's like the embodiment of this masculine. In dysfunction, it's more like a fake masculine, and when not, it's more like the divine masculine. Same with the nurturer and the feminine. So the warrior was basing all his actions on what happened before, because he had nothing else to base them on. He didn't have the sage's discernment, the eagle vision flying overhead to point him, saying, no, let's go here and let's go there. He was saying, well, look, the last million times I've done this has happened, so let's just base it on that again. So taking him home, he realizes that, okay, well, I'm in the arms of the nurturer. All this is actually just an expression of the family. So there is nothing out there. There is no external per se. It then becomes his playground. So he can drop his sword, he can drop his shield, and he can just embrace the fact that he is a lion, and the lion standing at the gate will be a deterrent for anything that may want to creep in there. But he doesn't have to go looking for trouble. And if he's just standing there, it'll be a deterrent to trouble. And if he has the discernment of the sage and the magic of the inner child and the nurturing behind him, he won't have any of that anyway. And life becomes graceful rather than this big bumpy ride of constantly crashing into things, constantly having to living in the mirrors of always fighting with things and always trying to contend with hardship and wondering why it always rains on your parade. A lot, so much can be put down to this function of our inner family, of our sub-personalities, of these 4 layers or levels of our psyche. So the interaction between, and what I've noticed actually as well is a lot of mistrust between the inner family members. So like the warrior may be annoyed that he's had to take on the roles of everyone else, and maybe doesn't trust that the nurturer can do her job of nurturing the family, of being able to hold the space for everybody, to be able to see the perfection in life. He may not trust the sage, or vice versa. The sage might say, well, look, he's not going to listen to me. He never does. But the thing was, he wasn't listening because he didn't know you were there. So it was trying to get them to realize that it's no one's fault. They've all just been separated. They've all done their best. And now it's time to come home and just sort of readjust and remember what their true functions are, and that the strength they have in unity of being a unified field, of being a proper family, is much greater. The strength they have is much greater than being alone. So when the child in particular of each of them, because they all have their own inner child, when we connect them all up to their own inner child, the actual inner child is like permeating all of their being, restoring innocence and purity and trust, surrendered trust, and immense power and magic pulsating through these already very, very strong qualities that we have. And you may find, as I was talking here, that you will identify with one or perhaps more, but usually one we'd find we'd identify with more than the other. That when we allow the innocence of the inner child to permeate the rest of the inner family, and allow the inner child to become our guidance system through innocence, that Almin says that when we show up in pure innocence, not naivety, but innocence, that we dissolve these mirrors. So life and the universe will conspire to bring us a gift when we show up in innocence. So that is, I guess that's all I'm going to say for now. Hopefully you understood most of what I was saying there. Any questions or comments, feel free. I'll upload this onto our group page. But yeah, your feedback would be great, and how you can identify with it. Like I say, this is a big part of what I work with my clients, because this functioning inner family is one of the key components to navigating a life of grace, to be able to move through life getting the insights without crashing into things, I guess is the best way to describe it. There's another sort of bigger picture aspect of this, which I think I'll get into in a separate video, and ties in a little bit what Leslie had asked me to explain in terms of our individuated experience, individuated existence compared to our greater being in terms of looking through the lens of the infinite. But I'll maybe leave that for another time and just keep this video solely for the explanation of the inner family. So, okay, going to sign off. Like I say, any questions or whatever, just give me a shout. I have a bit more information on the website, but this is pretty much as condensed as I can get it in a short period of time. So thank you, everyone, and good afternoon, good evening, and good night.